This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Welcome to another episode of the HR in Review pod. I'm your guest host today, Bill Banham, and joining me on this episode is Katie Neeves, Trans Ambassador at Cool to be Trans. Katie is a woman on a mission, but she says not just any woman and not just any mission. Katie lived for 48 years as a man while struggling with her gender and hiding her big secret to the world. She was thrown into turmoil when her gender dysphoria increased dramatically, causing her to go on a voyage of discovery before finally admitting to herself that she is transgender and that she needs to change her body. She then came out very publicly via coming out video, which she posted on her social media and sent to all of her clients of her photography and video business, risking her livelihood and reputation in the process. Hey, Katie, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Bill. Thanks very much for having me on.
So, Katie, beyond my wee introduction there, why don't you start by taking a minute or two and telling our listeners a bit more about yourself? Don't go in too much, if you don't mind, about your experience of coming out, because we're going to talk about that very shortly, but just a bit of an overview of who you are and what you get up to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I'm just a gobby trans woman, really. But no, let's say I've been a photographer and filmmaker for 36 years, and I thought that's all I'd ever do. But I struggled with gender dysphoria all my life, ever since my earliest memories, age around 3 or 4, of my mum catching me trying on some of my sister's clothes, and then she told me off about it and told me to take them off, and for every day the following week she would check and she'd tell me off that, and she told me that, that's what I shouldn't be doing. And so, I felt guilty about it. I don't blame my mum for that, but it's just one of those things that was always been with me for all my life, and I battled with it. And it finally, at the age of 48, I finally accepted and embraced the fact that I am transgender. I am a transgender woman. That I needed to change my body, and then this started this whole sort of set of events, and I ended up being this trans ambassador, or gobby trans woman, as I prefer to call myself.
HR in Review is a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management. You can subscribe at hrreview.co.uk/podcast or find us on your podcast app.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so you came out very publicly via that coming out video, which you posted on your social media and sent it to all of your clients. And that must have been a bit of a risk. You must have been pretty nervous when you did that in terms of what that reception might be. Tell us a bit about that.
Oh, I was hugely nervous. I can't begin to impress on you, how much of a risk it was. And because the thing is that at the time, my photography and video business was named after my old male name. It was called Martin Neaves Photography and Film. And the thing is that at the time, it had been an established brand for 22 years, and it got loads of great reviews, and all those reviews were referring to Martin. And so, I just felt that I couldn't take the name Martin out of the business completely, because it would be like starting the business from scratch, and I didn't want to do that after 22 years. And I thought nobody would know who it was. And so what I decided to do is come out very publicly as being trans. So I made this coming out video, and I sent it to all my clients, and I put it on all my social media, go big or go home. And I remember my finger nervously hovering over the mouse, knowing that as soon as I make that click to make the video live, my life would never be the same again. Anyway, I clicked the mouse and I waited. But then I had to go out on a job. My mind wasn't on the job at all. I took the photos as quickly as I could, but I couldn't wait to get back, because the thing is, I wasn't being freelance, being self-employed. I wasn't protected in law, by any anti-discrimination laws or anything. If my clients had an issue with my being trans, then the phone would stop ringing and I'd lose all my clients, my reputation, everything gone. But thankfully, I needn't have worried, because the reaction was just amazing. I had so many messages of support. I had hundreds and hundreds of messages of support. It was great. In fact, I didn't do any work 3 whole days because I was so busy replying to all the lovely messages of support. It was incredible. And coming out went from being something that I was absolutely dreading to being one of the most uplifting experiences of my life. It was amazing. It was right up, it was second only to the birth of my daughter. Incredible.
This edition of HR in Review is a special guest episode brought to you in partnership with our friends at the North American-based HR Chat podcast, a podcast focused on interviews with HR, talent and tech experts.
Do you think that people are more accepting today than perhaps they were 10, 20 years ago?
100%, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you think about what it was like when I was a kid in the early 1970s. You definitely wouldn't have come out. No one would come out in their right mind as being trans then. I mean, goodness gracious, it was no. I mean, you think it was only 2 years before I was born when it became partially legal to be a gay man. It was always been legal to be a gay woman, but for gay men, it was illegal up until 1967. And so in the early 1970s, although it had just been legalized, there was a lot of what was called queer bashing going on, but nobody. So that was just about gay people, but then nobody ever spoke about trans issues, and we're about 40 years behind lesbian and gay people. So we're a long way behind, but we have come a long way. There's still a lot further to go, but we have come an awful long way. And I think there's much more there's much more information about it. And I think the internet has really helped, because when I was a kid, there was no internet. That didn't exist then. But now there is. So there's much more information sharing, people sharing their stories, and it all helps.
Why do you believe that trans inclusion training is very necessary at work?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. I mean, there was a survey recently done by Crossland Employment Solicitors that showed that transphobia is rife among UK employers. As 1 in 3 UK employers admitted that they wouldn't hire a trans person, um, and you may be shocked by that ratio.
Yeah, sorry,
But
what? So can you give me that number again? 1 in 3 employers
1 in 3
openly admitted that.
admitted, yeah.
That's crazy. That's
But
terrible.
I'm shocked that the ratio isn't higher, because most of my trans friends have struggled to get work. And I don't think that it's that employers are transphobic. I just think that they think it's the subject is too hot to handle, and they haven't had enough training about it, and they're frightened of it. They're frightened. I think most people are lovely people, and they don't want to say the wrong thing or get it wrong. And they just think it's just too hot to handle, and so they keep well away. And so I think that's why that is. And also, there's some other surveys as well. There's one that sort of showed that 93% of trans people in the UK have experienced transphobia in the last year. 93%. Well, I'm not surprised about that at all. And also, I mean, recorded trans hate crime has increased by 56% in the last year, and 320% in the last 5 years. And but then it's only a tiny fraction of hate crime is actually reported. And so when you actually take into account the non-reported hate crime, the real figures over the last 10 years, it's gone up by over 7,000%. Yeah. So think this is why it's just so it's essential. Yeah, and I think people need to be told stories. They need to meet trans people. When most people haven't knowingly met a trans person, they will have done. They will have met loads, but they just don't know. They don't realize that they're trans. It's only the ones that are obviously trans that you can see a look or sound. Or, there's a mismatch between how they look or how they sound. Like me, obviously, people can't see me, but they're probably thinking, "Who's that bloke talking?" But you see me. I think hopefully you'll agree with me that I don't look like a bloke. But yeah, I think once people actually meet trans people, they realize that they're just ordinary people. We are just ordinary people who want to be happy, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And I think when people can actually meet those trans people and hear their stories, then they relax around the subject so more. I mean, I find that when I do my trans awareness training and inspirational people speaking, people are often nervous about talking to me initially, because they're worried about saying the wrong thing. But I use a lot of humor just to try and relax them into it, and just so that it just chills them out about it, and so they can feel much more comfortable talking about the subject. And I think that's what's needed, and we definitely need a lot more of it in the workplace.
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
I agree completely, and I've had a lot of conversations on my other pod on the HR Chat Show with leaders and DEI professionals who've said it's okay to get it wrong, Katie. If you're objective, and the reason why you're going into those conversations is because you're trying to learn, and you're trying to understand people who are different to you. That's it's much better to get it wrong than to your point, people being too nervous to come and speak to you in the first place. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. I'm not when I do my training sessions, I always sort of say to people they can ask me absolutely anything. I mean, so far there's been no question that I have refused to answer, and I create this atmosphere where people can ask me anything. And I say to them, look, if you ask me a question that might be offensive to trans people, then I'll still answer it, but I'll say it's probably best you don't ask that of other trans people because you may offend them, but don't feel bad for asking it because otherwise, how are you going to learn? You know, it's the only way that you learn is to let people make mistakes. And the other thing is that I say to people is when using pronouns can be really tricky. So if you've known someone for many years as he or him, or she or her, and then all of a sudden they ask you to use she, her, he, him, or they, them, or any other pronouns, it can be really difficult just getting into that new habit. But please try, because it means the world to us when people validate our identity by using our correct pronouns. But if you slip up from time to time, don't beat yourself up about it. You probably will, but try not to. Just apologize and move on, because as gender non-conforming people, we know the people who are supportive and the people who are not supportive. And if somebody who is supportive but who's known me as Martin and he, him for many years, just slips up and calls me Martin, or he uses he, him, then it doesn't bother me at all because I know they are supportive. But if someone does it deliberately and continuously, then that's abuse, and I won't stand for that. Yes, that's a different thing. So I think the thing is just cut yourself some slack and just try.
If you enjoy the HR in Review podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star rating in iTunes or in your podcast app of choice. This helps others find us and grow our community of HR and related professionals.
Thank you very much. Believe it or not, we are already coming towards the end of this interview, Katie. Just a few more questions for you. The next couple I'm going to challenge you to answer in 1 minute or less. Here we go. So in 1 minute or less, how can employers make the workplace more trans inclusive?
Wow. Well, mandatory training, absolutely. So many people, so many clients will get me in just to do a talk during Trans Awareness Week or Transgender Day of Visibility, whatever, and it's to a voluntary audience. But then you tend to only get the people who are already on side, so you end up preaching to the converted, and it doesn't reach the people it really needs to reach. Get buy-in at board level. It has to be. If the CEO says that being trans inclusive is an essential way of doing business, then it will happen, and it will trickle down to everybody else. Encourage people to use pronouns and show the pronouns after their email signatures and stuff like that. Having a flexible transition at work policy. There are so many things. I'm sure we're probably run out of time now, but things like using gender neutral toilets as well, having a flexible dress code, having staff pride groups and ERGs, that kind of thing. And if you are inclusive, shout about it. Let people know that you are inclusive. It really does help.
You know where's awesome for gender neutral toilets? California. And I noticed when I was in California a couple of years ago, specifically in San Francisco, pretty much every restaurant and cafe and bar I went to, there were gender neutral toilets.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
there we go, California. Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
well done.
Katie, next one in 1 minute or less. If you could pass on one crucial lesson that you've learned in your career, in 1 minute or less, what would be your top tip for leaders and HR pros?
Oh, right. Okay. So one lesson that I've learned, I've learned that being your authentic self is the key to happiness. And I think for HR people to know that their staff are happy, then it's a win-win because it, their staff retention rates are going to go up, and they're going to have happy staff who are going to be more productive, and it's better for the staff. They get happier staff. There was a survey recently showed that LGBTQIA plus people are 32% more productive when they're comfortable being out at work. Well, what's not to like about that?
Indeed. Thank you very much. And just finally for today, how can our listeners connect with you? So maybe that's through LinkedIn. Maybe you want to share your email. Maybe you're all over TikTok. Who knows? And how can they learn more about Cool to Be Trans?
Okay, yeah, I'm all over social media as either Katie Neeves, it's Katie with an IE, and Neeves is Neeves, or as Cool to Be Trans, that's cool, and then two, that's the number two, the letter B, and then trans, or as my website, which is cooltobetrans.co.uk. Any of those, I'm on all the social media, so you can't miss me.
Lovely. Well, that just leaves me to say for today, Katie Neeves, thank you very much for coming on this episode of the HR in Review podcast and sharing your story with our listeners.
Great, thanks very much, Bill.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by hrreview.co.uk. hrreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up and follow us on Twitter at hrreview or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.